Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone. Well, the question on everyone's lips, not on everyone's lips, but it's been something I've been thinking about a bit in the last couple of days, is the zombie genre now dead? Or is it dying? Is it breathing its last? Is it in its final death rattle before it expires for good? No pun intended. When you look back over the last 10 or 15 years or so, we've been treated to some pretty impressive and creative entries into the whole zombie genre. We had Danny Boyle's 28 Days Later, which breathed some much needed life into zombieism and zombie filmmaking and really sparked, I think, a modern day sort of renaissance. We've had Shaun of the Dead, we've had Warm Bodies, we've had Zombieland, we have had The Walking Dead, the TV series, we've had World War Z. Now, I don't mean World War Z the movie, I mean World War Z the novel. The novel was just such a creative take on zombieism. And the Korean film, which I think came out last year or perhaps the end of 2016, which was Train to Busan. I saw it last year. If you haven't seen Train to Busan, you really should watch this film, particularly if you are a lover of all things zombie. With that in mind, Ravenous, the 2017 Quebec French film, was released onto my local Netflix last week, or might have been the week before, and I decided over the weekend that I was going to watch it. And the reason I gave it a watch was because I got onto the IMDb page and there were lots of reviews on there which were talking about how awesome this film was and how creative it was, and this was awesome zombie movie making on a budget, and it's a must watch, and you just had to go and see it or check it out. And so I did that. I watched it. I got to the end of the film, and the first thing I thought was, who the heck wrote those reviews? Were these people paid to write those positive reviews? Were they people who knew the filmmakers? Were they people who worked on this movie? Because when I got to the end of this film, I was frustrated and annoyed with this movie. I wasn't frustrated in the sense where you go to a really bad movie and you get frustrated that you've just lost an hour and a half or 2 hours of your life that you'll never get back, or you've paid money and no one's going to refund you that money for watching a terrible film. I was frustrated because this film showed competence, but it just did not deliver. This was a film where you have, for the most part, a well-acted movie. It is made on a budget, but it's still well acted for what it is. And also, it is technically very competent, very proficient film in the technical side of things. However, the storytelling and the characters and the characterization side of things, it just fails. This movie just fails, and it can't put the total package together. And that makes it so frustrating because you think to yourself, imagine what could have been with this movie. The first 40 minutes of this film, I got to the end of it and I realized they were probably pretty pointless. You get introduced to various characters, but a lot of this is long and drawn out, and there's no real reason for a lot of the stuff. It doesn't sort of pay off later in the plot in any major or significant way. The real sort of driving point of the story starts about 50 or so minutes into the film when you have this whole let's go on the run, escape, chase type sequence that begins to unfold in the movie. And that's the real heart of the plot. Now, you didn't need the previous 40 minutes or so to get that thing started and to introduce everyone. You could have done that easily in a sort of 15 minutes, 20 minutes sort of intro, and then, got things kicked into life. But they didn't. It's just elongated and drawn out in that first 40 minutes or so. There's no character arcs in this film. The characters are exactly the same at the end of the film. Well, some of them have got a bit less of a pulse than what they did at the beginning of the film. But apart from that, these characters are largely the same from the beginning to the end of the film. The way they start is the way they end. There's no real major changes that happen to them like you would expect. And often what happens too is there's moments in this film that just are not earned. There's these big dramatic or sad or really emotive moments that should have some impact, and they would have impact if the characters had been written in a better way, and those moments had been earned, and there'd been development, and we had some sympathy for them, and we'd been shown that we should care about these characters by the way they're written. But we don't really care about these characters, and so you don't really care about what actually happens to them. There is almost zero character development, and what I mean by that is the characters are underdeveloped. You don't really know who these people are, why they are there, where they've come from. Now, I get it. They wanted to do the whole, we don't need to explain to you because we don't need to treat you, the audience, like idiots, how this particular zombie apocalypse began and what the cause of it is. Totally fine with that. I get that. And also because you're working on a budget, probably it saves a bit of money on special effects not to have to show big shots of the cities and everything else all crumbling under the weight of this unfolding zombie apocalypse. However, you do need to show us and give us information about these characters so we can understand who they are and a bit more about how they got here. But you don't, and you're not presented with any of that kind of meaningful information. There's little glimmers here or there and little hints at things, but there's nothing substantial enough to actually make you want to care in any major way about these characters, which obviously means that what happens to them just doesn't carry any weight. The other thing is that the characters in this film do some really stupid things, and you find yourself at times sort of looking at the screen and going, why are you doing this? This doesn't really make a lot of sense. So very early in the film, we have one of the characters who stops a truck and gets out of a truck in a situation where the two characters in this truck are at risk, and then he walks into a forest because he sees a zombie that he recognizes. But there's no real reason for him to do this. These are guys who are the survivors. These are the people who are not... that if this was video gaming, these are not the noobs. These are the experienced gamers. These are the people who know the system and who know that you don't do certain things because otherwise the zombies will get you. They are the survivors who have managed to survive the weeks since this apocalypse started, and these are the hardened zombie hunting professionals. And yet they are doing the dumbest and stupidest things that, like I said, a noob would be doing, and you're thinking, why are you doing this? Now, characters can do stupid things, but you got to give them a motivation for it. So the old trope about the guy who sees his wife and then chases after her and forgets who he is and puts common sense aside, or he sees the little kid zombie and he doesn't react like he should because, you know, his compassion takes over and then he gets bitten. Right, we all understand that you've got a motivation for why they did that stupid thing, but in this film, there's no motivation given for why these characters are doing these stupid things, and as a result, it just makes for a really frustrating film watching kind of experience. The other thing that was really annoying about this film was the zombie lore. The zombie lore in this movie is so inconsistent. It creates its own zombie lore, and then it is not at all consistent in the application of that lore, and there are things that just don't make sense. So in this film, you get bitten by a zombie and you contract zombieism. I'm guessing, I'm pretty sure that's how it works. You become a zombie, right? Because there's this whole big thing about being bitten and then how that affects you. So the assumption here is that you get zombie blood or zombie infected body matter into your orifices or into your bloodstream, and you're a gone burger, right? That's what the whole bite thing is all about, that the zombie virus gets into your bloodstream. And yet we have a character very early on in the film who blows the head off a zombie, and you see her with a close-up shot. She is covered in zombie body matter, and it is clearly at the side of her mouth and around her eyes. And I remember thinking to myself, how is she not going to get infected? This doesn't make a lot of sense, right, in relation to the zombie lore you've established. But it's not just that. There's other aspects of the zombie lore in this film where it's even more frustrating in the way the rules are not consistently applied in the storytelling. So, for example, one of the things they set up is this whole idea that the zombies in this movie are attracted by loud noises. So you've got these great little moments in the film where characters do things like they close the vehicle doors that they're in with this real gentle precision. It's very deliberate and very slow, so all you get is that final click of a door closing and not the regular noise that you get if you just shut a car door like you normally would, because obviously if you do that, the zombies will come. But then within minutes, they are doing other things which are louder than closing, or at least as loud as closing a car door would be, and there doesn't seem to be any ramification for it. All of a sudden, the zombies are not interested in noise. And this whole rule about noise just keeps chopping and changing throughout the film, and there's no consistency to it. You have these zombies who are predatory hunters, and they chase and pursue people at great speed. But then other times they sort of stop and don't seem to be interested in pursuing you anymore. You have zombies that clearly can see that you are human and will hunt you. But then you have a scene where a character stands still and he looks directly into the eyes of a zombie, and the zombie does nothing about it. And you're thinking, why? Why did that zombie not react when all of the other zombies in the film have reacted to the same sort of scenario? And then you have this thing, probably one of the more frustrating aspects of this film is the fact that the zombies in this movie, they build monuments. There's one monument in particular, which is like this massive Tower of Babel made out of chairs. And they all seem to be sort of standing around it and congregating around it. And you think to yourself, why are they doing this? When I first saw this particular monument and the whole scene with the zombies around it, I thought to myself, this is interesting. I wonder if this is going to pay off as some sort of concept about how their former life and their memories are sort of perhaps kicking in, and this is a sort of metaphor about consumerism or mindless sort of engagement or social media or something, right? But it's never explained, it never pays off, and as a result it just becomes this pointless cul-de-sac in the story. This is not put at the service of advancing the plot. Instead it just becomes this, hey, look at this cool looking visual. Zombies standing around a monument of chairs that they've built. Isn't that interesting? And you're like, well, yes, it could be if you actually develop that idea, but at the moment this is nothing more than pretentious sort of visuals that are chucked on the screen and you want me to find interesting. If you want to see a much better version of this type of filmmaking where you have a low budget movie that has a rural setting and is trying to break into an existing genre, then you should watch the 2010 film Stakeland. Stakeland focuses on the whole vampire genre, but it does it well. It's made on a budget, it has a rural setting, but what it has that this film Ravenous does not have is an engaging story, and interesting characters, and character arcs, and things that make sense. There's a lore, there's a mythology in this film that is actually followed through on and consistently applied, and as a result, you have an enjoyable movie experience despite the limitations, and at times it does show the budgetary constraints that were obviously on this filmmaking. But you don't get that with Ravenous. Instead, you have this situation where the story and the characterization and the consistency of the lore is just not present, and there's lots of stuff that doesn't make sense or isn't explained, and you find yourself really frustrated. Now, I know some reviewers have said, oh, no, this is basically a form of postmodernist sort of filmmaking, and it's all about engaging with the zombie genre in a new way. No, I'm sorry, that's just nonsense. It's like someone going to an art gallery and standing around a load of rubbish that's been dumped on the floor and saying, wow, I love this new art installation. I see the search for human meaning. I see the people clamoring over the detritus. I see the way that consumerism is consuming us. I see the post-9/11 geopolitical environment. No, you don't. You're being pretentious. It's just a pile of rubbish on the floor. It's not art, and it's not particularly well made. The same is true of this film. If you're trying to tell me that this is some sort of clever art piece and it's all postmodern and etc., no, it's not. It doesn't have a story. It's supposed to have a story, and clearly there is the basic framework of a story here, but there are key elements that are missing. As I said, for me, this was a really frustrating movie experience because you get to the end and you think, man, I see competency here, and I can only imagine how good this film could have been if only they had put the whole package together. As per usual, I'd love to hear your thoughts though, so please let me know in the comments section below. Do you agree? Do you disagree? And if you like the content I'm making and you'd like to see more of it, then please support me on Patreon. A huge thanks to all of my Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome, particularly in this age where demonetization is so random and unpredictable. It's really awesome to know that you're backing the content that I'm making and you think that it's worthy enough of chucking something in the tip jar each month. If you want to support me on Patreon, there is a link in the description below, and there is a link that will appear on screen at the end of this video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time on Left Foot Media.